Good evening. Hope everyone's having a great day. What beautiful weather we've been enjoying over the past several days. Tonight, lesson 4 in our study of the book of Revelation, we'll be looking at chapters 4 and 5. But before we begin to do that, a couple of things. First of all, thank you to all of you from Lamar Avenue who sent me a happy birthday wish on Facebook. I really appreciate that. Um, there was one post, though, from Lamar Avenue that shared with everyone just exactly how old I am. And not going to mention who that was, but his initials are Daryl Bulls. So, one of my beloved elders. Thanks, Daryl, for letting everyone know exactly how old I am. But love you anyway, brother. Secondly, please remember the announcement that was made last week. We will be moving our Sunday morning assembly back indoors at our auditorium on October 25th. So that means we have 2 more Sundays left meeting at the pavilion over by the Civic Center. So again, keep that date in mind, and we will, of course, be reminding everyone of that date and what will be expected of all of us when we begin to reassemble here at the building. All right, let's jump in to our study tonight. Again, Revelation chapters 4 and 5. I hope you have a New Testament handy and maybe even have made a copy of the notes for tonight's discussion. As I mentioned this past Sunday morning, the scene of Revelation moves from earth, where it began in chapters 1, 2, and 3, to heaven, where it will remain practically for the rest of the book. Chapters 4 and 5, if you were present at the pavilion Sunday morning, or if you watched the video, or if you have read these 2 chapters this week, depict 3 things: the heavenly throne, a scroll or book, and the Lamb. God is on the throne. He holds in his right hand the scroll. The scroll has writing on both sides, and it is sealed with 7 seals, 7 being the number of perfection or completion in the book of Revelation. Initially, John is upset because no one is worthy enough to break the seals and reveal the contents of the scroll. But John is assured that the Lamb is worthy to open the book. And that's exactly what the Lamb, who of course is Jesus, begins to do in chapter 6, verse 1. So let's go back and look closer at a few of the details of chapters 4 and 5. And then at the conclusion of this brief discussion, I'll have some things maybe for us to think about, some primary points from these 2 chapters. Chapters 4 and 5, if you have an outline, you'll notice easily divide into 3 sections. The first section is all of chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, which we might simply call the throne. The chapter begins with "after this." We will encounter this little phrase, "after this," 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more times in the book of Revelation. And it refers to the order in which John will experience or see these visions, not necessarily their historical order of the occurrence of these events. In fact, I will argue or suggest that What John will reveal is simply the same story in maybe a different way or in a more intensified manner to really make his point in the book. But we'll talk some more about that as the study progresses. So John has been ushered again from heaven into the spiritual, timeless dimension of God's heavenly realm. And when Jesus does begin to open the seals, all of the visions, beginning in chapter 6, verse 1, and continuing through chapter 22 and verse 5, they all flow out of what John is experiencing here in chapters 4 and 5. There will be visions again that immediately come out or flow out of the scroll or the sealed book that we will talk about in just a moment. In these visions, John will learn, will have a mixture of past, present, and future events. Well, back to chapter 4. The text says that standing open or standing before John is this entrance into heaven. The way is clear for John to peer into heaven and to see God in all of his splendor. And immediately he sees the first sign of victory. God is on his throne. And then, as I mentioned this past Sunday morning out at the pavilion when I preached from these two chapters, talked about how God manifests himself to the Apostle John. And anytime God manifests himself, it's referred to as a theophany. And so John uses the word jasper. It's not the semi-precious stone that we know today, but more like crystal, more like being clear, like a diamond. And so this might represent the holiness and the glory of God. He also uses the word carnelian, red, like a ruby, which might suggest God's fiery radiance in all of his power. John also sees a rainbow, the sign of the covenant of God's mercy. A rainbow always appears when? After the rain or after the storm is over. But God is not in heaven by himself. John also witnesses beings around the throne, 24 elders, which we will continue to encounter in our study of Revelation. The 24 elders seem to represent God's people. In fact, John uses multiples of 12 to depict God's people throughout the book of Revelation. The thunderstorm, again, represents maybe God's presence, his majesty, his creative power. And before the throne, John sees a sea of glass. And there are a number of suggestions as to maybe what the significance is of the sea of glass. The one explanation that I tend to lean towards is the fact that the sea is used in Canaanite mythology as the source of evil. We see that in Psalm 74. We will encounter this in Revelation chapter 13. But here, the sea is not out of control. There are not evil beings coming forth out of the sea, but it's peaceful, it's calm, And God, again, is in control. In fact, when we get to chapter 21, at the end of the Revelation, John will write that the sea is no more. So it's very interesting, again, the symbolism and the typology, the figurative things that John draws from to, as best he can, describe what he is seeing. There are also four living creatures around the throne. They appear to be cherubim, angelic forces of the highest order who guard the holy things of God. You might compare what John says about these four living creatures with Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10. The lion perhaps represents strength, the ox, service, the human wisdom, the eagle, swiftness. And so, again, these four living creatures surrounding God, in God's presence. And what are all of these beings doing as they have gathered around God's throne? They are worshiping. And that was our primary focus this past Sunday morning from these two chapters, God's last word on worship. So we come to chapter 5, and the second section, verses 1 through 5, we read about the scroll. And again, an Old Testament reference that you might go back and read would be Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 9 through chapter 3 and verse 3. The implied content of the scroll has been understood in a number of ways. The destiny of the world, the book of life that we will read about when we get over to chapters 20 and 21, the book of judgment, decisions about the future, maybe even just representative of the scriptures, or perhaps a combination of all of these. But I think more specifically, it contains the visions that are about to be revealed to John, written on the inside and on the back, full of meaning and importance. The seven seals, again, the number of perfection, guarantee the inner contents cannot be changed. Breaking the seals indicates not only fuller revelation of the contents, but also the execution of those contents, representing God's will being done in human history. And as I mentioned Sunday morning and briefly mentioned just a few moments ago, John weeps because there doesn't appear to be anyone worthy to open this scroll or this book, to break the seals. And so for John, the grief that he was experiencing, the concern that he is expressing, would be the thought that perhaps God's will would be thwarted. It would not be done. It would not be accomplished. But John is assured that the Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy to open the book. And so we come to the third and final section of these two chapters, chapter 5, verses 6 through 14, where John turns, anticipating to see the lion, but instead sees a lamb that had been slain. This lamb, of course, is Jesus. 7 horns, 7 eyes, meaning that Jesus has complete power. Horn representing power. eyes representing complete or perfect knowledge. And this new song that the worshipers break forth into to sing describes the redemptive work of the Lamb. It's for God. It is through His blood. It is universal. It makes those who respond to the Lamb, who place their loyal trust and faith in the Lamb. It makes them a redeemed kingdom. And verse 12 emphasizes that Jesus is worthy in 7 areas: power, wealth, wisdom, might, honor, glory, and blessing. So, chapters 4 and 5 are a way of introducing the series of visions that John will begin to see, will begin to experience in chapter 6, and will continue through chapter 22 and verse 5. So we might say the stage has been set for what we might refer to as the first big dramatic movement in the book, when Jesus will break open that first seal. But remember, the Father is on the throne. The destiny of humanity is known to Him and is under His control. And Jesus alone is worthy to reveal the outcome between God and evil. So, if you've made a copy of the outline, here are, I think, 6 key points from chapters 4 and 5. Number 1, God reveals to John His purpose for the world, which began to be accomplished with the death and resurrection of Jesus. Number 2, John's pastoral aim is to assure the suffering Christians in Asia Minor that God and Jesus are sovereign and are in control. Number 3, I believe I mentioned this Sunday morning, knowing the future, and a lot of the future will be revealed to John, the immediate future, by the way, is not a matter of obtaining insider information, but of knowing the God who holds the future. It wasn't some Greco-Roman God, and it certainly wasn't Caesar. It was God and the slain Lamb. Number 4, the future is not so much an item to be analyzed then, but a supreme being to be encountered. Because in reality, He is the one who holds the future. Number 5, the events that these Christians are facing will culminate in their vindication and redemption with the punishment of their persecutors. And then finally, number 6, beginning in chapters 4 and 5, John begins to explain God's authority over evil. And we'll learn 3 things throughout a study of these chapters. First of all, evil happens. It's a fact of life. Number 2, God, though, is in control of evil. And finally, number 3, God will ultimately destroy evil. So between now and Sunday morning, I would encourage you to continue to spend some time reading Revelation chapters 4 and 5. Again, using your imagination, reflecting upon God sitting on His throne, reflecting about the contents of the scroll, reflecting upon Jesus as the slain Lamb. And then beginning Sunday morning, read Revelation chapters 6 and 7. Those will be the two chapters we cover next week. And this Sunday morning, I will be preaching from these two chapters, and we'll study the last word on evil. So have a great rest of this week, and looking forward to seeing you Sunday morning at the pavilion at 9 o'clock as we assemble there to worship our Creator as His people.